Hi, everybody. We are Christine and Colin Poole, and we are absolutely delighted to be here today talking to this amazing panel of sculptors, none of whom need any introduction, but we are going to start off by letting them do a brief introduction of who they are and what they do, so that if you have any questions, you'll know the panel that we're working with. Today, we're talking about sculpting, and we're talking about critters, creatures, concepts, and clay, and we're ready to get started.
Brandon, why don't you jump in? Who are you?
So I'm one half of the Shiflett Brothers sculpting team. I like to think the better half. And we're sculptors from Texas who work in the collectible comic book statue industry. And about half of what we do is commercial work, and about half is our own original design and concept stuff. And we do resin, we do porcelain, we do bronze as an end product, and we work together, and everything we do is credited Shiflett Brothers.
Jared, do you have anything to add to that, just so we know who the other half is, if you can't quite tell?
I'm the other half, and I don't have a lot to add to that, but we do, we never worked in comic books, but we feel like we came from a kind of a comic book background because we collected a lot, but we have a deep love for comic books, so that's kind of where our thing is coming from. We do 3D, but that's just where we ended up, and we're happy to be here at the Lightbox Expo.
We think you're also a terrific ventriloquist. That dog?
Yeah.
And Patrick Masson?
Okay, so I'm Patrick Masson, a French freelance sculptor working mainly in the miniature collectible industry and also the board games miniature industry. So doing miniatures for this kind of stuff. And I'm also working on some more personal pieces that have been featured in some books or on some other things. So I try to work more on bigger stuff right now, trying to test some and wanted to do some bronze to add to my career.
Excellent. Forrest?
Yeah, I am ancient life form working in mixed media, some Japanese air-dried clays, mulberry paper, strange sort of feral lot of materials, and just at this point doing pretty much my own work. Used to do dinosaurs for the Carnegie Museum of Pittsburgh, their toy line. Used to, studied costume and stage design, things like that, and came through a very circuitous route to land here.
And we are, again, Christine and Colin Poole. We're both sculptors. We frequently collaborate on sculptures together. We work in fired clay and bronze, very traditional materials. Colin is also a painter. You can see some of his paintings behind us. And I'd like to tell the attendees that we're going to have a discussion first. And if you have questions that come up, go ahead and type them into the Q&A, or you can type them into the chat. And towards the end, we'll answer as many as we can. Or if it's something that pertains directly to what we're already talking about, we may just introduce it. But please do feel free to add your questions into the Q&A tab.
I'm going to jump in with a question for everybody. Are there any materials that are new to you that you've been experimenting with recently? And what's the good and the bad of them? Do you love them? Do you want to never use them again? And Patrick, I know you've been up to something. Tell us your experience.
Yes, indeed. I've just started working with some Chavin Le Beau Touché. So this is the piece I've worked recently on that is behind. So it's a bit new to me because it's a bigger scale. I used to work on very small scale. It's a kind of interesting material, yes. I was a bit disturbed by the stickiness of it at the beginning because it's a bit too much to me. So you have to get used to it with your tools. Otherwise, it's stick too much and you have some trouble to put the different volumes. But when you get used to this one, it seems very interesting material. And I love the way that you can finish it with a paintbrush and some spirits, just to make a very shine on and also very flashy surface. So it's kind of interesting. I think I will use that probably more in the future.
And you usually use Fimo, correct?
Yes, right. Yeah, I mostly use Fimo on polymer clay, yeah, for my miniatures, right?
Jared and Brandon, I see you posted something recently with a large dragon that looks like a bunch of different materials that you're mixing up together. Are any of these new to you, and what do you think?
Yeah, the core of that large sea serpent is Paltaya, Paltiya, and that's a product that they keep improving on. Kim Beaton and Warren Beaton of Weta, it's what's great about it is if you cure it correctly, sorry, it's good for outdoor sculptures, and kids can play on it and all that stuff. So that's what's cool about it, and we're just trying to figure out, this is the first time we've ever used it, and it's pretty cool. So we've always daydreamed about doing some outdoor sculptures, so this kind of lends itself to that, hopefully.
Normally, historically we've used Super Sculpey, a polymer clay. You bake it in your home oven at a low temperature. More recently, for some of these pieces, we've started using epoxy clay, Aves epoxy sculpt, 2-part epoxy you mix together and it hardens. And it's a little tricky because we do a lot of sort of teaching, or we show demos or instructionals. And with this epoxy clay, it's a bit more of an advanced game. It's a little bit harder to teach beginners with that stuff because once you mix it together, it's hardening as you go. So in effect, you're sculpting it. When you first start sculpting with it, when you first mixed it, it's one consistency, and 10 minutes later, it's another consistency, and you're making up how you're adjusting on the fly, is what I should say. Whereas with Super Sculptor, it's the same consistency the whole time through until you bake it. But that Paltaya is interesting. But historically, we use Super Sculpey and epoxy clay.
What are the pros and cons of the new material? What are the cons?
Well, the epoxy clay, the pros are it's super durable. So that if we were going to sculpt something that's going to be a one of a kind for any reason, or if something we have to ship a long ways, or we're worried about the delicacy, this stuff is really strong and it's durable. Super Sculpey is more fragile, but we're very used to it, and it's what we grew up sculpting with. And if we know something is just going straight to the mold maker, we can sculpt it in Super Sculpey and send it off. But if sometimes we have commissions where somebody wants a one-off of something put on their shelf that no one else has, and if somebody asked us for something like that, we would do that in Aves epoxy sculpt.
Makes sense.
See a question, and we have tried Cause Clay. Can everybody else see that question?
Oh yeah.
So it's heard amazing things about Cause Clay. I just bought some, but haven't used it yet. Have you used that?
We have tried it, and it's great. It's a lot like Super Sculpey. We sculpted a creature from the Black Lagoon, and then we sculpted a little plesiosaur head coming up out of the water. And we didn't take advantage of its coolest properties, which is that it's flexible. It's actually billed as the fantastic flexible. I'm not looking into the camera. I'm so sorry. It's a fantastic flexible plastic. And so once you bake it like a polymer clay, then it's incredibly flexible, and you almost can't believe it. until you see it. Because when you think of polymer clays, you think a pencil shape is just going to crumble when you bend it like this. And so when it doesn't, it's like, wow, that's the magic of cause clay.
So
And,
for horns and spikes, right, Jared?
Yeah.
I mean, because
fingers and
you
stuff.
have these delicate looking little pieces, which and yet they bend and they stay in place. They shoot back into place, and it's really amazing stuff. We have the creator is on our forum, and
Arnold Goldman.
yeah, and it's some really cool stuff.
So the forum they're mentioning is the Shiflett Brothers Sculpting Forum on Facebook. They have around 40,000 members, and people just share all kinds of great information about working on sculpture in any kind of material you can imagine, and even ones you can't imagine.
Yeah,
That's right.
totally.
It'd be great. Facebook Shiflett Brothers Sculpting Forum. And
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah. Well, I don't, let me see, that there's a material from Pataco in Japan called Modena, and it's called an air dry polymer clay. Here's let's see if I can get it. There it is on my phone. And I haven't used it enough to know all its virtues and flaws, but it comes in a white or a translucent, and it's very interesting because you could do thin parts of sea creatures or petals or translucent fins and not have to bake it at all. In other words, if you're building something in a material that doesn't want to be baked, it might come in very handy as an addition, but I haven't used it enough yet to testify to its particular nature. I do know that if you want to use it in a press mold, it seems to take detail very well. And it's from the same company, Pataco. I'm always using the Premier air dry clay. So it's a company I've come to trust, like their stuff. Yeah.
So Forrest, have you learned anything with the air dry clay about the longevity of it? Does it, does it have,
it's a, what I like about this one, some people may find it too soft, too, it's very personal taste as with all these materials, but I've been using it for I don't know how many years, and I have heads and limbs knocking around in boxes that show no ill effects at all unless I say step on them. And it's what I like about this one is it feels like its own material. It doesn't feel like a would-be ceramic, or it's very light, it's very smooth, it has polymer and stone clay powder, probably volcanic ash, I would imagine. And I use it with a lot of mulberry paper and things like that, which I seal with, say, golden brand acrylic gel mediums, all of which are good in archivals. So using the air dry stuff depends very heavily on making a really good armature, and how you Premier air dry from Pataco, and this is, I just saw a question pop up. It's distributed by Activa in this country, and it used to be hard to find. Now you can find it at Michael's and all over the internet. So yeah, sure. So it's a stuff that can be very strong and long lasting. You can hurl it across the room in a fit of despair, and then seamlessly mend it with your papers, your glues, your etc. No one will ever know you did that. It's a good thing.
So, Colin, you've recently been experimenting with combining the oil-based sculpting clay Labo Touche from Chavant with other materials to create fine detail.
I have been. I've been mixing it with monster clay when I'm getting to the very fine tips of things. And I find that I can have a combination of ratios that help extend very thin bits. And I'm enjoying how that is. And actually, initially it's a little bit discombobulating because of the color difference, but now I'm finding that color difference is really nice to be able to at a glance go, yep, got that there. So that I know exactly what it is and when the mold materials, when I'm working with the molds and that type of thing.
Hold on for 1 sec. For people who don't know, monster clay has a high wax content, and so it's stiffer than something like the Chavant oil-based clay.
And I've also, with the Super Sculpey, which I'm inexperienced with, and thanks to Patrick Masson, I found that what I thought was just, it's so fragile and it's garbage, that I wasn't baking it long enough. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm over baking it. And then Patrick was informing me that no, put it in the oven longer. And that helps a whole bunch.
So something that, because all of you are very unique and diverse in your creativity and your imaginations. And so a question that has come up on other panels that I'd like to put out to all of you is how do you generate your ideas? You know, how do you come up with new concepts, and how do you determine which ones you're going to follow and which ones you're like, that was cool, but I'm not going to do it? Anybody?
You know, one thing I was going to point out was, oh, sorry, go ahead, Christine. Cause clay and monster clay are the same thing, are the same maker, monster makers.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. How do you generate new concepts? How do you come up with your ideas? How do you decide what you're going to spend your time sculpting?
Well,
Go ahead, Forrest.
I was just going to say, I'm working on Elizabeth I as a shrimp right now.
That's
And I that comes sort of from having been in the costume world and from noticing in paintings of her epoch what fascinating little details painters got to put into the garments. You know, there's actually a beautiful lady in her fancy dress, and you'll find flies and mosquitoes and caterpillars painted into that garment. And also the fact that Elizabethan clothes of the quality of Queen Elizabeth's do not look human. You know, they're in her case, I suspect, a kind of armor, so that makes me think crustacean. I think crustacean anyway, but it means that those things came together quite nicely in my mind. Yeah. And she has claws, mind you.
Cool.
I love it.
Good.
Looking forward to seeing that one.
Thank you. I do too. Yeah, it needs to get done. And as far as which ones I carry through and which ones I don't, I'm apt to start lots and lots of them, and then some of them just sit there for 5 years, and then I think, oh, wait a minute, that has an interesting quality about it, and then I resume work on it. And some of them, I start one thing, and it even just its head may say, no, I'm something else completely, and I end up following that piece off in some direction I didn't intend to go at all. Yeah.
Cool. And Patrick, when you're working on your personal pieces, what's the best?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. Usually it comes from I will say a flash of something that comes in mind. Usually it's linked to first to a pose a body that I would like to that I want to sculpt, and then I try to imagine an environment to that, so to give some story to that pose, or to that feeling that I want to express through that pose. Currently, in fact, I started that piece about a year ago. I want to work on an idea of a witch, and I think I probably talked about that already last year, but and it's I had some idea about what is a witch in my mind, and then I decided to find a pose that is in movement, and she will walk on fumes, smokes, but that smoke turn into animals. So you only see pieces or parts of animals coming out of the smoke, and that's the witch itself that make these animals come out of the smokes. But it's a way for her to walk on top of that. So and yeah, as I said, the starting of this idea was really a pose that I wanted to give to a woman body, and the story around just came afterwards. So that's usually how it starts. But sometimes when I start something, I don't have really the idea directly. It comes from working on it, and then it changed. It changed during the process.
Totally.
Most of the time.
Kind of dive in and see where the piece leads you. Sculpture, oftentimes, we think of just like a figure. Your death sculpture is somewhere back there, right, Patrick?
The one I was speaking about?
No, the one from Spectrum.
Oh, the one from Spectrum. Yeah. This one. Yeah. This is.
Yeah, and show us, because Patrick does actually create these little environments in which his sculptures, his personal sculptures, exist. And it's quite an interesting approach. He does work in miniatures. So you can see the figure at the top there. This was one of the pieces that got into the Spectrum book. And you can see that she's really on top of this whole environment that he's created for that figure.
That's awesome.
Isn't it cool?
It is. Mm-hmm.
We've had the pleasure of seeing that in person. Yeah. It's astounding.
Yeah, it's amazing.
How much detail. I mean, the figure is literally this big.
It's astonishing to me. Yeah.
Brandon and Jared, same question.
Yeah, so I feel like ideas are never mine and Jared's problem. It's more like time. We have tons of ideas, and we always seem to go back to our influences, who are a lot of fantasy illustrators from the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Obviously, Frank Frazetta and Jeffrey Catherine Jones, guys like that. We look up to Mobius a lot, the French comics artist. Like Forrest, we start a lot of stuff. I think we more stuff than any of our peers who do the kind of thing we do. I think we just start dozens and hundreds of pieces, and a very, for me and Jared, a small percentage of those ever gets produced.
Yeah.
I think most people who have a gig like ours, almost everything they sculpt is produced. That's just how the time works, how people allot their time. Me and Jared start stuff all the time, and we're really good at starting them, not so good at finishing them. But
that's the truth. Yeah, it's fun to start them and to feel inspired for a night or two, and then it's hard to finish them. It's hard to actually turn it around and do the back of the knees and under the feet and then all that stuff. But we do sketch out a lot of stuff, and you know, it's not all great, I'll be honest. But that's what happens when you just fiddle around and you're always making stuff. Some of them are better than others. And even if we make one we like, we might only show it from one angle, you know, because we're very picky.
And also, like Forrest said, we'll abandon something and we may come back to it years later.
Yeah.
And we may turn it into something else, or we may just finish it how it was. It's like, oh, there is something redeeming about that I didn't understand when I first started it. And I'm going to finish it now. And you know, when people ask us about inspiration and our ideas, I always tell them to look at other art. I mean, that's when I have a block of some kind, that's what I do. Pick up one of these Spectrum books and flip through it. And it just gets my mind racing, you know, with new ideas and branch off in new directions when I see this amazing work, and not just in 3D either, but, you know, our friends who are painters and illustrators, pencilers. That stuff can be really inspiring for me.
Yeah, I will add that last week I was in Roma, and seeing also spending some time to visit museum and see all the old masters' works is such a huge piece of inspiration for me. So it's really after that I always come back with some things that I want to try. It just okay, I've seen that and I want to do something in the same kind of spirit or the same kind of atmosphere, and it may evolve in something else, but for sure it's always a big inspiration.
I mean,
we're talking about Frazetta, and Patrick is talking about Michelangelo. He's far classier than we are. That's Europeans for you.
I'm going to turn the question on to Christine.
Yeah, so in the before times, we spent a lot of time going to museums and looking at art. But I think one of the best sources of inspiration and generating ideas that I have is just being curious about everything. So, you know, it's not necessarily just art. You know, I'm curious about what's happening in the medical world and what's happening with, you know, people that are printing things out of plastics and people that are traveling to space and electron microscopes and all these things, because everything can be fodder for, you know, creativity, which oftentimes is bringing together things that don't seem like they would go together. So I would say starting from a position of being curious and allowing yourself to explore things that you're unfamiliar with. And usually when I'm trying to, you know, come up with the next direction I'm going to go, my favorite thing to do is to take a walk, take the dogs for a walk or go jogging. And I don't necessarily try to think about anything. I just allow my mind to wander, and all of these things that, you know, we see and experience in life and think about kind of sort themselves out. And eventually you have what Patrick was talking about, this flash, where I'll actually just see a picture in my head of what this is going to be. And sometimes it's based on a word, and sometimes it's, you know, that visual image, and sometimes I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that that's the thing that I'm going to make, and I know it's going to tell me as I start making it what it is and why it needs to be. And Colin?
I would expand on that by saying a lot of it is it's both the inspiration we get from the old masters and the museums, which we've also traveled with Patrick in Rome and France just to hammer the museums, and that is this just wellspring of inspiration. But a lot of it is letting the paths open themselves. So as you're creating, letting it flow, walking down that path, seeing whether it takes you somewhere. I've been doing writing as well as the sculpting, so I find the writing feeds the sculpture, which then inspires the writing. One sculpture will feed another sculpture. A path that you didn't take in this sculpture, you take in something else, or maybe you take it in a painting. It's a matter of allowing yourself that luxury to peer down and walk, you know, the path less traveled, the road less traveled, but to walk down all of them and see where they lead and what comes of it. I think we were working for a number of days with a model from Cirque du Soleil. And she brought an energy and a vitality and a flexibility
And a theatricality.
that was astounding. And over again, we would see something in her movement that would lead into a direction. And so that's been something where we just did a couple of weeks ago, and that has already started multiple sculptures.
Yeah, and if you're fortunate enough to get to work with a model that you really can develop a rapport with like that, I was just giving her cues. I would give her a prop, any prop, a feather, a piece of fabric, a rock, and I'd be throwing her cues. What if this was your worst nightmare? What if this was something you cherish dearly? What if this was something that you're going to lose? And she would just start doing stuff, and it was really fascinating because she was actually generating narratives and stories in her movement. So that is actually, if you have that kind of interaction with a model and you have access to that, that can also be a nice way to play through different ideas and almost have like a visual conversation with somebody and creating what it is that the story, like kind of sussing out the story that you're working on.
And I think also feeling out how the model responds to cues. So you can give them a small cue and then let them work with it a little bit. But oftentimes it's giving them cue after cue. So you say, you give them, as Christine was saying, you give them an object and you give them a minute or two to play around with that. And then you start giving verbal cues and directions where they don't have time to necessarily consider it carefully. They just get into the moment.
It's like a game.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun, and you can get some unexpected positive results out of it.
So,
That's interesting. I would add in that vein. Jared and I, we always tell people on our own stuff, we don't start with sketches, and we can only really be it can only really be called a vague plan when we start. When we start sculpting, we're essentially making it up as we go. So just like Colin was saying, we leave our minds very open to what we're doing. I thought I wanted wings on this monster, but now I'm taking them back off, and it's all about design for us. It's all about what looks best. And we can start thinking a sculpture is going to be one thing and it ends up being something entirely different. And that's how we roll. We just roll with it in that way.
I sort of think of it as holding the reins very loosely, and and then it can be a conversation with the idea and it can talk back to you.
So somebody was asking about stop motion, and we have never done that. I don't know if any of you have ever done anything for stop motion. They're asking if you have advice when working with stop motion armatures.
Anybody can field that one?
I can't.
So I do know something about that just from looking at the interwebs, but I think you want to basically sculpt it in a neutral pose. You don't want to lock it into a certain thing because you're going to have to move it around. And that's my 2 cents on stop motion. We've never done it.
We were inspired by Ray Harryhausen and Phil Tippett and those guys, but we've never tried to do any of that stuff.
Ray Harryhausen is extremely influential to a lot of the stuff we do. Something like the eye mirror, that's basically a humanoid reptile that has a tail. That 2 legs and a tail tripod was our first 20 monsters, because it would stand on its own simply because of that. But I love the humanoid y'all are doing with the animal heads. Colin and Christine, y'all were talking about y'all's influence, inspiration. I love those. I'm so sorry Mako has decided he's going to bark, but I love those pieces with the humans with the animal heads, and I'm gonna attend to
Yeah, the humans, we've been doing a lot of humanimals since 2020, and we had done a series of them many, many years ago collaboratively. And then last year, because of all that was going on, I felt like what I needed and probably what people needed was something that might be a bit more whimsical and lighthearted. And so I just started making these animal-headed people that was called the Garden Party. And they were all small sculptures that could be rearranged in any number of ways. So they were interactive and playful. And I just let myself do that. sometimes, if you're kind of veering into a different path and you feel like some of your work is like more serious or whatever it happens to be, there might be a little bit of self-flagellation about that, but I just let myself do it. And I had a wonderful time working with these little figures. And I think it actually shows in the final piece that, there was a joy and a playfulness in doing them, and it wasn't labor. So yeah, I've been enjoying them, and I'm planning to start one called the Fête Galante. Artistic style of that Fragonard, the painter. So
Nice.
Wow.
Where the girl is kicking her feet up and there's the guy in the bushes. And it was just a period of time, I think mostly in French painting, where they would have these elaborate parties in the garden and they're all very dressed up and they were playing, on swings, and mostly based on romance and love and that kind of thing, and the kind of romanticization of love. And so the next set of them is actually going to be based on that, which was part of what our model from Cirque du Soleil was helping me with. So we had a swing, made a swing. We had her on the swing and she was just, Frenching it up for me as best she could.
That's great.
So another question is, if somebody was interested in starting sculpting, say they're a 2D artist drawing, digital or whatever, first of all, can you speak to what you think the benefit of learning sculpting would be for a 2D artist? And also, how could you start where you don't have to buy a kiln and bronze casting and all this stuff? What would be the best way just to kind of start getting into it?
Brandon?
So yeah, we recommend Super Sculpey. Again, we love it, but for beginners especially, it's just an easy way to get into it. And of course,
you don't need a kiln, because a kiln goes up to 2,000 degrees. And so a polymer clay like Super Sculpey, you just put it in your home oven at 230 or 250. And so that's the big difference, where you don't have to invest in that kiln. And also, when you're putting water-based clay into a kiln, a percentage of them are just going to explode. And so that can be very frustrating. But with polymer clays, put it in a home oven, make sure not to burn it, open the windows, turn on some fans, get it circulating, and it has some great properties where you can keep working on it after you bake it, carve it, and drill it. And so it's easy for beginners, especially if you get the Super Sculpey medium blend as opposed to the Super Sculpey firm, which can be a little frustrating because it's very dense.
Do you have something to add to that? How do you begin?
Yeah, I would second that, and also mention again this air dry clay, this brand and several others, because it's a thing that could be used in kindergarten or for the most complex object you can imagine. And you can inventively combine it with all kinds of other materials, air dry materials, acrylic materials. You can even do some parts in polymer and then build more of it in the air dries. And there's much to be learned, but it's a very easy start, I would say. Yeah. In some ways. Yeah.
You build your sculptures on armatures, right? And
I do.
Build your own armatures, and what materials do you use that you've been effective with the air dry clay?
I start kind of have to start sort of sketching a piece. Well, starting, I scribble on napkins and things. Now I do it pitifully at home instead of in a cafe for obvious reasons, but I'll scribble on paper, and then I will often start with aluminum armature wire, the armature wire that is made for armatures, because that is, it holds its shape well. It's good for sketching out a piece. And then I will decide what areas of that armature I want to be stronger, more rigid, and I will use brass rods of various thicknesses and or stainless steel wire if the wire is going to come very near the surface, for instance, and I'm using all kinds of weird materials and I don't want any rusting or verdigris in the case of copper. And then I'll wrap it very tightly with, I'll be running, hold on. Yeah. Yeah. Here's the shrimp.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And she's got long claw things that are, I started by sketching in the very flexible, lightweight, probably 1/16 each aluminum wire, but that is too flimsy for the final object. So I replaced for her pinchers with brass. She's got her frill, which is very fine gauge stainless steel. And then I'm using a lot of aluminum mesh that is fine enough to be cut with scissors, plus more brass rods where I want them and square brass tubes to create a non-rotating attachment. And then I will use things like the Avis or Aves two-part epoxy fix-it sculpt, which is, you didn't think I wanted to be on here all by myself with just human beings, did you? Yeah, this fix-it, one thing that's interesting about this, it's from Aves too, but this will take heat up to about 500 degrees or so, it says. So it's particularly interesting to use on your armatures if you're gonna move away from air dry and into something that needs to be baked. Yeah.
Cool.
Christine, want to answer that?
I have a question
Yeah,
for Brandon and Jared.
Mhm.
By the way, do you always work with four hands?
With our hands?
For four hands, I mean, do you always on your PCs? Do you always work both together,
yes.
or how do you share the work?
We do share it, and we collaborate in every way you can imagine. So, you know, I start stuff, Jared starts stuff, he comes in, I come in. Sometimes one of us might work very little on a piece, but the other one is art directing the whole time, or vice versa. Sometimes we hand them back and forth multiple times.
Yeah.
There are things that Jared is better at than I am, and we for sure both have what we like to do the most, the kinds of things we like to sculpt. And so we have a rule that, like, whoever starts the piece kind of has the hammer, like, yes, I do like that, or no, I don't. And everything we've ever done has been affected by both of us in one way or the other.
Yep.
So I feel like a nice way to start sculpting if you don't want to invest in a lot of stuff is just to go buy a bag of water-based clay. It's about $15 for 25 pounds. It's pretty inexpensive. And to just play with it. Take the material out, squish it, make stuff, do sketches, roll it, maybe eat it, I don't know. But you basically just let yourself have permission to play with the material and see what comes out. You don't have to fire it. If you wanted it to be permanent, you would, but you know, that's down the road. If you haven't done sculpting, the best thing for you to do is to just give yourself permission to get some material, whether it's, you know, water-based clay, what we're familiar with, or the air-dried clay that Forrest is working with, or some of these Sculpey or Fimo or something like that that you could bake in the oven, and just get the material and just actually give yourself permission to play with it and, you know, see what it feels like doing something in the round. If you're a 2D artist and used to that one view, what does it feel like to have a backside of a piece to play with? You know, are you going to put stuff back there that is engaging to your viewers so the back is just as interesting as the front? And what does it look like from the side? And it helps you to start thinking in that more 3D and the round kind of a feeling.
Chris had a question for Forrest. How do you paint your finished sculptures? Do you airbrush or hand paint or a combo? What kind of or medium? Can you feel that?
Yes, my favorite, I was running around gathering stuff. Golden soft gel gloss, I mix to seal the sculpture. Well, first of all, I let that air dry clay dry in layers of, no, you know, I build it up after I've done the central armature and I've maybe reinforced it with the epoxy clays, say, and I build it up. You need to really, really dry it. In fact, the underlayers I stab with a little awl like you went after a baked potato in order to kill it, and let it dry. I use a chicken brooding lamp to put my pieces under to dry them out. And once they're really dry, then comes this soft gel gloss from Golden, which I mix as they advise for an isolation layer, 2 parts of this gel medium to 1 part water. And I often tint it slightly with an acrylic paint, just very slightly, so I can tell what I've covered, and I will paint it on to the bone dry, air dry clay, which seals it really well. And this, I use this instead of a gesso because it sticks best in my experience. It's good for collage and things. And then once you've done that, and you might do a second coat, being careful not to obliterate your detail. However, you might water down the first coat a little more, do a second coat. Then you can use acrylics. Assuming you've really sealed it, you could even use oils. You could use water mixable oils. You could use gold leaf. You can do kind of anything you want, which is an advantage. I usually end up using acrylics, watercolor mixed naughtily with acrylic medium because I want it to behave, stay where I put it, and so on. Yeah. And then at the end, I mix often a satin and a matte acrylic varnish together, about half and half, and just varnish the final result as long as it is in acrylic. Yeah.
We do a lot of our ceramic work is, or our fine clay work is cold finish. So we don't use glazes. We find glazes seem like you're dipping in colored cream and it obliterates all the happy details that you work so hard to get.
Yeah.
We tried all kinds of things from stains to oil paints. For a while, we did a number of them in caseins, which is an interesting
milk protein paint.
And that is that has a curious opacity to it, which I can't say that I'm necessarily fond of it, but we did some of them that way. And then we've shifted back to basically acrylics on the last couple pieces we've done. And the combination of all of those can be very effective. So obviously following the basics, you don't want to put water base over oil base, but you can do the reverse. So I think give yourself the freedom to experiment and see what your vision is and how you can manifest that with whatever you've got.
And I think the best thing, with that is, again, to do that experimenting and to not get yourself necessarily locked into this is how we have to do it. Because we find that, how my sculptures want to be finished may be quite different from how our collaborative pieces are, as Colin's, the pieces that he does. So we feel like, when you're out there looking at work around the world, like Brandon was saying earlier, and you see something that you think, wow, that's really an interesting finish. I like how that looks. I wonder how it would work on my piece. we get the materials and we experiment and see, we don't copy what they're doing, but, we like the effect of the materials. And so we'll just take it on and play with it, see where it takes it with our own work.
And if you do something in terracotta, then you can usually find like a community space that has kilns. And, maybe for a little donation or something. That's something we did in the past, and you just have to sit there with it for 15 hours. But still, you could, some places, somebody in the city will have a kiln that you can probably use.
Yeah, agreed. I think where Christine was starting is just play it. Don't worry about how finished permanent piece is going to be. Jump into the pool and thrash around and see what you, and ultimately, if it turns out you're brilliant right out of the gates, and now you've got to figure out how to finish it. What Jared was saying is, you can take it. Any small town to large city is going to have somebody who's a potter, and whether you rent a little bit of a shelf of the kiln or something like that, most commercial potters or they're going to have kilns running all the time, and it's a matter of you put in there whether it's a small donation or there's a small fee to it. And not everything explodes in the kiln, but
It's just what I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what you're hearing from all of us is we all start a lot of sculptures. I have buckets full of body parts of sculptures that I started that just, I chopped up and threw it in the bucket.
It's gruesome.
Gruesome around here, yeah. And, so if you're going to start sculpting, it doesn't have to be something precious or perfect, and you don't have to finish it. You can just, play with it until you don't want to play with it and do something else. That's a good way to go. So Miranda is asking, can you describe your studio setups and how do you organize the different materials? How's your studio set up?
So we don't really have a studio. We did have a storefront, like in a little shopping mall a long time ago, but now we just work out of our homes. I just have a bedroom. I have 2 little areas where I work, and so it's just working in a house,
But the studio, but you still have a setup. And what me and Jared both have, what we like is I like to have everything to hand where I don't have to get up and get anything. And so it's sort of 360 degrees almost, where I have my reference books, I have clay, I have my armature wire to my left, tools and glues and everything. Because once I get flowing, I love to just keep going, and actually getting up and down, I can find distracting. So I have everything I need within reach. And we use one main tool, which is really a burnisher, which is a pretty heavy metal tool. And we use a lot of tools, but not as many different tools as people sometimes think. But I have all of these things to hand, and that's really works for me.
I want to see the burnisher.
Yeah. Hey, Jared.
Sure.
Jared, there's been several requests to see your dog. So if she's bugging you, just bring her out and let her be on your lap.
So this is that burnisher, and on one end it has a point, and on this end it's also pointed, but it has a bit of a spoon shape to it, and so that's what we use for 90% of the work on our stuff. Of course, our scale, is about a foot tall. It's 10 to 12 inches is our go-to scale. So you can imagine the heads on those are, like an inch maybe. And so we need to get some pretty fine detail in those little faces. And that's our favorite tool. We use a little bit of ball tools, a little bit of loop tools, but not as much. Our process is, people talk about pushing, and it's very additive, and we're adding clay and we're adding clay. A lot of our Hollywood sculpting friends, it's more of, they add too much clay and they're raking the clay away. So they're removing the negative space. That's not really what we do. Our entire process is additive. We're building it up a little bit at a time with pretty small pieces at our scale.
Patrick?
Yeah, my setup is kind of the same. I have everything handy because I'm working mostly on small scale, so I don't need a big space. To be honest, I'm just in front of a camera, and the space that I have when I extend my hand is the only space that I need to sculpt. Although my desk is quite long because I have another part on my left where I do all the dirty things. When I have to sand something or to cut something, I work on my left just to do not put some dirt into my clay. The right space is the one I will use or I use when I sculpt digitally, because I do work also digitally on with a ZBrush. And the last one is for the last space is for painting, but I never paint, so it's useless. so that's yeah, that's the setup. But as Brandon was saying, every tool that I use are on my desk, just in front of me, so I can pick it. I can pick them all the time and just working directly in front. I don't have a lot of space. When I will work on bigger scale, then I will probably need more space and more space around my PCs.
Forrest, you have a new studio. How's it set up? How's the functionality?
I have been attempting to recreate the space that Brandon just described because I too want everything within reach. And it occurred to me, we don't have a nurse handing us the scalpel, so we kind of have to have.
That's right.
Yeah, and here is my favorite tool, which looks pretty much identical to the ones you guys use. And I lose it all the time. So this is what I put on its less useful end so I can find it. I panic when I lose it, but yeah. And similarly, so I've been getting closer to that point where I can reach out like an octopus and grab things. And I just fixed I like to have a sculpting stand, but I also like to have a table. So I can stand or I can sit. And I just figured out that I had an extra kind of flimsy sculpting stand, and I put one of those panels that's made for painting on top of it, like a little table, and attached it. And now I can have a little rotating sculpting stand height table that's lightweight, which I like. So yeah. But very similar to what you guys said. Yeah.
I'll tell you about our studio, but we have just like 2 minutes left. So I wanted to let everybody, all the attendees, know that at the very start of the chat, I've put everybody's websites and their social media and ways that you can get in touch with any of us or see more of our work. And so while we talk about our studio, if you want that information, I would scroll back to the top of the chat and you can screenshot it or hit the links or whichever. And there's the other baby, so sweet. So our studio space is basically a 22 by 22-ish, what used to be a garage. We have skylights in the ceiling and 2 walls are windows. So there's a lot of natural light. And our secret is wheels.
Nice.
It's on wheels.
Yes.
Because if we're working on a big sculpture and then Colin is working on a smaller sculpture, everything has to be able to constantly be in flex and move around. So we have several sculpting stands. His easels, when he's painting, those are all on wheels, and we can reconfigure that space. Right now it's configured for photography. And this area here is our gallery space, and it is also part of where we'll work if we're doing a whole bunch of big things at once and it just is getting too cluttered in the studio. We'll take part of this space. And we also have a fireproof building outside, cinder block building that houses our kilns, and it's where we do our welding and has all of our metal working tools, grinders and things like that. It's not a pretty building, but it's very functional, and it helps us keep the fiery tools contained.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that?
I think that's covered.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap this up. I believe that these videos will be accessible on Lightbox Expo for the duration of the weekend. I'll send them along to the Lightbox Expo people. We want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. We love all of you. We love all of your work. We're such huge fans and we admire you. And thank you everybody who joined in and stuck around and joined us for the talk about sculpting. Anything you want to add?
Just our extreme gratitude, both to the attendees and also our panelists. You guys have been awesome. Jared, Brandon, Patrick, thank you for joining us again. Forrest, thank you for joining us the first time.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can hoodwink you into doing it again.
Thanks, y'all. We had fun.
It was
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thank you
Very
guys.
very
much.
much.
Great to see you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all.
Bye.